Let's find my, oh, I can't find my, here it is, coming up. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Redemption Thursdays with Rabbi Pinchas Winston of Telstone, Israel. We're headed into our fifth week of war, started by Hamas, that did so many atrocities to our people on October 7th and just continues to fight us. And our brave soldiers are on the front lines of the north and on the south, trying to protect us and doing a great job in protecting us, and our leaders. And our guys are learning in yeshivas, davening for us every day. So we've got all kinds of holy soldiers out there, in addition to people like me doing chesed. I'm sure me and many, many others. I myself have been responsible for organizing meals for at least 2,000 soldiers and all kinds of equipment coming in and loads and loads of things from America. Thank you for you American people for your great support and your wonderful stuff. We want to say a special mention to Josh Wander, who is our partner and who usually is with us, but he's fighting somewhere in the front lines, and I don't know where he is, but he did take himself off of Facebook, so I know that he's doesn't want to be found at the moment. So anyway, let's say a special prayer for him because he's helped us start all this. Rabbi Winston is started a new website, and it is called sharnun.org, and he's got it there, www.sharnunproductions.org. And he discusses many other topics that he usually continues with essays and articles and books on the 50 Gates of Understanding, which he might want to explain to us. It's a deep Kabbalistic concept, how we can work ourselves up towards the most deep understanding of Torah, which Rabbi Winston helps us with every single week and helps us understand what we're going through right now. So thank you very much, Rabbi Winston, for joining us.
Thank you. I'm not going to go through the explanation for the website right now. It takes up too much time. But it is an explanation on the website. So I would suggest that anyone who's understand it should go take a look, because that's where I have been uploading essays pretty much on a weekly basis to do with the situation and ideas, important ideas I think that people should know, are out there, to have to maintain a perspective on what's going on, because that's we'll see as we talk about some material today. There's two battles going on always in life. At least one battle is always going on, and sometimes two battles are going on. The one that's going on right now, there's two. There's a physical battle, which we're quite well aware of, and they happen periodically, and there's always a war going on somewhere in the world. And as we learn from Parshas Kiseitse, which is when the Jewish people are instructed about the laws about going to war, as most of the commentaries point out, that the beginning of the parsha is not talking about it's talking about a physical war on a surface level, shot level, but it's talking on a deeper level about the spiritual battle that a person has with the Yetzer Hara, with himself, the Sitra Achra, the Klipas, Chitzoni, whatever you want to call them. But the spiritual battle, that's ongoing. That never, as long as you're awake, even if you're sleeping at night, the halach has to do with how to go to bed. But during the daytime that you're conscious, you're awake, the battle's ongoing. And as the Mesil Shasharim points out, Derech Hashem points out, that anybody who doesn't feel that battle going on means they've already lost it. Even a tzaddik assumes that it's still going on, and still fights that war. And the physical battle, ultimately, if you believe in God and you believe in Torah, and we do, and there's with good reason, because they're both 100% true. A person has a problem with that, they have to go check it out and find out why we do believe that. But this is the real reality. I mean, everything that goes on in history is overseen by, first of all, created by God, overseen by God, run by God, sustained by God. The good, the bad, it's all Hashem. Ein od milvado. There's no other but Hashem. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The Lord our God, the Lord is one, means it's all from Him. There's nothing else but God. So He can control the physical wars, even though things may seem to get out of hand and we don't have that control ourselves, but He does. He has perfect control over every single situation at all times on the most minute levels of existence. It's all from Him. So He can therefore make it a reflection of the spiritual level of the Jewish people, or responding to the needs of history at that time. And therefore they're interdependent. They're tied together. So that's why in Parshas Kiseitze it starts off talking about the battle a person has with the Yetzer Hara, to indicate that if you want to avoid the physical war, then fight the good battle against the Yetzer Hara. Solve that one, resolve that one. If you can keep that one in check, then the other one's not going to happen. And there's promises that the Torah promises. God promises us that. And the opposite is true as well, that if we're having physical battles, it means that something's lacking from creation, something's lacking from history that has to be fulfilled through this and within ourselves. And therefore, it's also musar to fix things up. And we have done a lot of that. You see that the war just brought out so much positive change in so many different people, all of us, and our whole consciousness has changed because of it. And if it hasn't, there's something wrong with that person. But everybody on some level, and some for the worse. In the world, the fact that this could result in increased anti-Semitism is absolutely mind-boggling. But it's not because it created it; it's just because it brought it out, revealed it, and that's part of the end of days. Is what Hashem does. He, every time there's about to be a redemption, every time history comes to a certain conclusion, and this one is the conclusion, the end of history, the final redemption. So then everything has to be revealed and exposed for what it is, and you have to be careful what you're doing and your opinions and where you end up standing spiritually and physically. People who want to leave Eretz Yisrael at this time have to really seriously consider what that might mean. They may think that they're running away from a situation, but in fact, the land may be spitting them out. You got to be careful. Be very careful, because it's like musical chairs. My mind always reminds me of musical chairs, the game you play as a child where the music plays and then it stops and you have to get a chair to take away another chair, and it's like kind of maneuvering yourself. You go fast in between the chairs to get to the chair, but you don't want to be in between chairs when the music stops, because it means you won't get one. So the same thing is true when the music stops on history. When Hashem brings the final redemption, you want to make sure you're doing the right thing in the right place at the right time, and that's all part of what we're on. We're working in the entire time. It's all part of our personal development, which, by the way, the most important parts of it take place during the peaceful times, not during the war. The war is like already the end of the story. This is what the Gemara says. It's a little bit of a discussion, but the Gemara says that ein adam the person only sins if a spirit of insanity enters them, meaning that someone believes in God, believes in Torah, they know the right thing, they know they're doing a sin. So why would a person in their right mind go ahead and rebel against God? They know who God is. You look in the Chumash, they knew who God was. And how is it possible? So therefore the Gemara says only if they have a spirit of insanity. It might be temporary. I mean, the Western courts, I don't know about the Eastern courts, but the Western courts, you can plead insanity. You can temporary insanity. The guy sitting there at, being defended in a court of law, perfectly normal. Everyone talks to him. He's got all of his faculties, working just fine. But he claims at the moment he did the crime, he was temporarily insane. He was out of touch with reality. And it might be true. And the Torah does account for things like that for sure. And so the Gemara is saying that at least at the moment of sin, a person is in fact acting out of character, acting, out of touch with reality. That's why they're doing this chet, what the Gemara calls insanity. So the question then becomes, if that's the case, so then why are we held responsible for that sin? And because everyone knows that an insane person is not obligated to perform mitzvahs. Okay, before, after, yes, but the moment they weren't obligated in the mitzvahs, so therefore they should be pater. They shouldn't have to answer for the chet that they did. And the answer is, you're right, that's true. So then why are they chayiv? Why are they culpable for the sin? For not having done the work in advance of the moment to avoid losing their mind. For example, if a person knows that they're hot-headed and they have an issue with temper, and they walk into a situation, they know they're going to blow up, no matter how much they don't want to. They know if they're caught off guard, they're caught by surprise. So a person doesn't stand it. Before they go there, they tell themselves, this is what's going to happen. This is what I have to do. Here's what I can do to help myself avoid the situation and then come out of it without having lost their temper. A person knows they speak Lashon Hara. Every time they go to a wedding, people start talking at the table, and sharing information, right? And it's lashon hara, and they know that they get caught up in it. They start to hear and speak it, and they realize it's a problem. It's an avera, and what can they do? They have to go to the wedding. So what you do instead? Sit at a separate table, different table. Think in advance. One of the best examples, of course, is on a diet. If a person decides they want to stop eating fattening foods, and they go places where they serve fattening foods, they tell themselves, "No, I'm not going to have that second piece of chocolate cake. I won't even have the first piece of chocolate cake." And they go on an empty stomach. It's not going to work. You do a chasana, a wedding, on an empty stomach, and this delicious food being served, a lot of it, everyone's eating. It's part of the fun, part of the chavayah. Shabbos too, right? So it's very hard at that moment. The Yetzer Hara overtakes you. That's the insanity. The Yetzer Hara, it's like, well, I can always take it off. I'll just, exercise twice as much. Tomorrow I'll starve myself, which maybe you will, maybe you won't, which is not so healthy. So instead, have a salad before you go to the wedding. Fill yourself up on vegetables so that you're satiated and you're full. You don't have the same appetite. It's the preparation that we do in advance, and that's why God gives us peaceful times. It's not His way of saying, you suffered during that period of time. Now you have a day off. You have a decade off, or 2 decades. We just had like 4 or 5, 6 decades off after the World War II, after the Holocaust, and we thought, well, that's because we paid our dues and now we're moving on, and everything's going to be just fantastic and fine and peaceful. It would slide right into the Mashiach, the period of Mashiach, without a problem. It didn't work out that way. That period of time after World War II was to allow us to integrate any messages and lessons that we're supposed to have learned from the Holocaust and before that, so that for what's coming up next. So be ready, because what we don't realize, and this is very important, is that we may not think in terms of redemption, but God does all the time. History has a beginning, and history has an end, and everything in between is only to go from the beginning until the end. So you're on a journey. You're driving from one city to another city. You might stop for gas. You might stop to eat something. You might stop to even stay in a hotel overnight. But none of it is in its own right. It's a separate experience. It's all part of the experience to get you from point A to point B. So we may not be cognizant of how the events of history do that, but God is, and He's constantly pushing us and pushing us. So after the Holocaust was over, we had to ask ourselves, okay, that's happened. Did we learn anything? And how can we use what we gained for what's coming up next? But what is coming up next? Let's take a look. What has to come up next? What's missing from history? Where are we going? What's our final destination? Don't just wait to find out. That's how we get stuck. That's how we end up getting in trouble in the end. Again, all over again, right now, all over the world, situations getting more dangerous. People are noticing. Years ago, I used to talk about this, and they didn't notice. They didn't talk about it. Now, people are noticing. Even people who didn't notice it are talking about it. Are you coming? It's like, whoa, it's a big headache. You have to sell your house. That doesn't take a month or two. I mean, that could take a year, to get 2 years to get asking price, if you can get asking price at this stage of the process. And then there's all the logistics of packing up where you're coming from to where you're going to. All those people who are here and now took years to do that. And it started with a thought process, a mentality, and they start preparing themselves for it. So when they finally had to do it, it was all as organized as possible to minimize the amount of mistakes and problems that could arise. No one had a perfect ride of the entire thing, but you do as much as you can to minimize it. You need to rush it. It's not an easy transition. Yeah, and you ask them, what does it take for you that you have to see to say, yes, now I have to go? And it is amazing what people answer. They answer something that you can then say back to them. Well, think about it for a second. If that's what you need to see before you feel, yes, this is the time we have to leave. We have to leave. It's life and death. Will you be able to? Will the situation still allow you to? Or will it be so serious a problem, like in Europe in the late 1930s and early 1940s, that the door is basically shut? Do you want to wait that long? You want to take that chance? I was talking to somebody the other day who's on his way making aliyah, and he told me that I happened to mention that some people who left in 1938, after Kristallnacht, they were probably called alarmists. They probably called people, panickers, because they were leaving whatever they had to leave behind and going to save their lives. And because his grandfather did that, he survived. His grandfather survived, and he's here today, a grandson, because his family survived World War II. And other people probably, as they probably told me, you have to? You really feel you have to? And probably feeling a little bit that maybe that might be a good thing to do, but still stuck because they're rooted locally where they are, and it's too hard to move. And by the time they realized that he was right, it was already too late to go, and unfortunately, they perished in the Holocaust instead. And all of this is the result of preparation. It's a result of understanding what's really going on, especially from a Jewish perspective. And it's almost like a particle collider. I don't know if you're familiar. I mean, probably everyone today has heard of a particle collider. That's one of these incredibly expensive things to build for the sake of understanding how. I mean, one of the real reasons, the ultimate reasons, it's being used for a lot of research for just to understand the fabric of the physical world. But part of it has to do with understanding how the world was made back at the beginning, back at the time of the Big Bang. And what they do basically, set up this huge, like, monstrous tube from metal with all kinds of wires. It uses electromagnetism to keep beams of light very focused that have within them atoms, and they go in two different directions. And by smashing into each other, it's almost like a small nuclear explosion in a sense, but in a safe amount that you can actually also photograph on some level the results of it to understand, and discover, like, even smaller elements and the fabric of the physical reality. And it's like when they do, a tremendous amount of energy is released. They come from two different directions, and boom, they hit each other. That's almost what's going on here too. How is that? Because you have the reality. That's what you're seeing every day in the news, or you're hearing about, or whatever social media you use to keep in touch with the war, what's happening in the world, not just here, but also the Ukraine, and Russia and other parts of the world, right? There's that physical reality that you can't really ignore. It's there, bullets and tanks and planes and bombs and all that, and anti-aircraft fire. It's the real stuff. You can't. It's not like a biblical version of reality. And then you have the Bible. Then you have the Torah. You have Tanakh, Torah, the Vim, even Kesuvim, the Nil. Right? You have that, and that's like the storybook. That's like it's not the story. It's not in the story. That's the instructions, so to speak. That's the blueprint, if you will, for all of that, right? So people have a difficult time matching them up. With the Nevi'im, Yeshaya and Yirmiyahu and Daniel, and Yechezkel and all these. Daniel wasn't a prophet, but other prophets who spoke about the end of days and what God's doing. And it's like biblical history. You read that, it's the Haftarah on Shabbos, and the Torah itself. There's all, Kibbutz Galios and Parshat Nitzavim. There's that reality, which we have to believe as Torah-believing Jews, and we know it's kind of like has to do with what's going on, and it's going to come back at the end of the days. But on the other hand, you've got this reality of nations, just the war of Gog and Magog. Who is Gog and Magog? Who are they? I mean, Magog he's mentioned in the Chumash in chapter 10 of Parshas Noach, right, where we're talking about the descendants of Noach and Japheth. His descendants include Magog. The second verse there in chapter 10, Magog is mentioned. But where's Gog? Gog doesn't show up anywhere in Tanakh at all, except in reference to Gog and Magog. So Magog we know, but who is Gog? And why is it Gog Umagog? Why isn't it, why Dafka them? Why specifically those nations or that nation, whatever this variable of Gog is? Maybe it's a what, not so much a who. But like what's so special about them that they're the ones at the end of days are going to be the opponents of God, causing what basically amounts to World War III. If what is described is what's going to happen. I mean, the Nevi'im talk about war, and Chazal talk about war. They're not talking ideological war. There's no question, by the way, that the war of Gog and Magog has different phases to it. And part of the war of Gog and Magog is ideological. In fact, Rav Shimshon Rapha Hirsch, he explains that Gog is the ideology and the Gog is the extension of that ideology. So whatever Gog is, it's a philosophy, it's an approach to life, maybe even the Monroe Doctrine. And the Gog, because the word adding the mem to it is like causing it to go out. You want to turn almost a noun into a verb. You got from this thing and extend it. So he wants to say that Magog is really just the extension of whatever Gog represents, and he says it's ideological, Western thinking, because he was living in the 1800s, and in those times, right, that's when the Haskalah movement began, and everything started to come out, right? I believe so, if I'm correct. And that's what he was fighting against. He was fighting against the onslaught of Western thought entering the Torah world and the Torah world entering the Western world. At the same time, he's trying to find the balance to keep people from while still participating in that world, because it was inevitable, it seemed. So that's part of the battle. Is that, but is at the end of it? Well, maybe it was enough. Maybe if we won that one, then it was enough, because we do know that the very first test that Adam Rishon ever had to deal with was Das, Eitz Das Tov Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That was his first test. That was his first milchama, his first war he had to fight. He lost it, but that was the battle. And we've mentioned before in the past how every millennium corresponds to a respective day. So the sixth millennium, which we're in right now, corresponds to the sixth day, and how the test of mankind at this stage of history matches the test of Adam Rishon, which was the Eitz Das Tov Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So therefore, our test is also in the realm of knowledge. And maybe that's the word of Gog and Magog. There's good reason to say so, and we'll get to that later on, B'ezras Hashem. And that could be enough if we won it, if we didn't have to fight it. The same if, for example, if Adam had passed that test in the Garden of Eden, that was it. Nothing else to do. Shabbos would have come in, and we would all be in the Garden of Eden today, enjoying paradise. He lost that battle. He was expelled from the garden, and then they had to fight physical battles after that. Cain kills Hevel. 50 days after leaving the Garden of Eden, Cain murdered his brother. And that's just the beginning of it. War after war after war after war, all because we lost the first battle. So maybe if somehow we rose to the challenge and we won the battle of Das, of knowledge, today, that would end the need for any physical battle. But it's not really happening. We see that battle. I mean, not a month goes by that I don't find some new book out. They sell these books by my shul, put them on a table, and they put money in the box, and you can buy the book. And it's always another book about the internet, and the effects of the internet, and how it's taking people away from Torah mitzvahs, and how to fight it, and how to get rid of it, and et cetera, et cetera. And people, it's kind of hard. Things we accept and we bring to the Torah world, that's perfectly okay. Something's not. And it's, people, a lot of confusion, a lot of community. You have to know what's the stringency, what is the hakpada, what is an actual avera, and such a mix. And then people are exposed to it. So one family won't do this, but the other family does do that. They're exposed to the kids. It's very hard, very, very hard to win. You almost have to take yourself or your family to a desert island and have no one else there but you to try and control the situation. Other Yetzer Haras will spring up, but control the battle for Das. But it's just overwhelming, just like it was for Adam Rishon too. And because it's so overwhelming, individuals might have victories because either they're very stringent and they, or some are strong enough to battle it out and can find that balance. Not easy, not too many. Others simply lose it. But as a community as a whole, it's been a very, very tough battle. And so, when the prophets talk about the earth shaking and nations coming to each other, the Gemara itself, for example, in Avodah Zarah talks about about Gering Gerurim. Right? They're literally converts that are dragged along, people in the process of converting or already converted, newly converts, and even wearing tzitzis at this point in time, wearing tefillin, and they see this massive army coming towards the Jewish people. Himself instigates. When I say instigate, he doesn't go to start the battle. It's just that his appearance and his commitment to the Jewish people and the goals of God, that's what instigates. People don't like good people doing good things, so they feel instigated, but really it's their own problem. That's what they see this massive army coming against God, his Mashiach. So they get intimidated. They start taking off the tefillin. They kind of like disappear into the woodwork because they're afraid to be associated with the Jewish people at that stage of history. But at least they were in the process, and hopefully they'll come back to Iran. Right? But you see, the references one out. So it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to ignore them and pretend they're all just talking, metaphorically. So. But what is this to do with all that? How does this work? We're going to go back a bit, okay? This is where the particle collider, mashal analogy comes in. We're going to separate the two sides. Discussing the war as until now, we've been discussing in the situation, the reality of it. Put that aside temporarily, because we're going to look at the Torah basis of the war of Gog and the final redemption, what redemption itself means in general, and then we'll try and bring the two together and show how one is actually influencing the other, and not in ways that you might think. And it might even turn out there's some new ideas here, some important ideas from that might actually explain some things, because that's the way it works in history. God. This is a known concept in Kabbalah. It's a known concept in Judaism, that you can know things today that previous generations did not. Because it's not special. It's not that we're smarter. We're not. That's for sure. We're not wiser. That's for sure. So why do we have this knowledge that they didn't? Well, sometimes it's because of things like technology have helped us to understand the spiritual world more graphically, in a way that we can relate to, pictorially, where we can see actual things, how things work, because the physical world is just a physical projection of the spiritual world. Whatever's going on in the physical world is just a reflection of the spiritual world. Soon I'll show you how even something like E = mc squared is actually very Kabbalistic. Actually may be a very Kabbalistic something that we hold by very strongly in Kabbalah, although the scientists themselves don't realize it. But it's actually very fascinating. But that's for a different time. Just right now. So let's go back to the beginning. What are we after? What's the whole point? What is geula? What is redemption? So the first thing you have to understand, and this is brought down, it's very important, that even though there have been 4 exiles, we're finishing up the 4th one. Probably we have finished it. Some include a 5th one called Yishmael, but as I've discussed in the past, it's different. You can call it an exile if you want, but it's not really an exile. It's more of something else, which we'll get to later on, B'ezras Hashem. But the Medrash talks about 4 exiles: Bavel, Babylonia, Medai, or Media. Then you have the Greek exile, which was Yavan, that took place actually inside Eretz Yisrael, and Hanukkah coming up, B'ezras Hashem, in a couple of weeks, celebrates the victory, the end of that exile, is part of the end of exile. And then, of course, the Roman exile, which is the longest of all. That's what Yaakov Avinu saw in his dream. The angels, going down, and going up and then going down the ladder. each one according to the amount of rungs that the exile was meant to last. But, the first one 70 rungs, which is really 52 and 18, and then 180 for Greece, and then the Roman one just goes up and up and up, and Yaakov never sees him come back down again. But 2,000 years, 2,000 rungs, everyone look at it. It's a very long, deep exile. It's also talked about in terms of the second verse of creation. The earth was null and void, and there was darkness upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered above the water. That whole pasuk is talking about the 4 exiles, null and void, right? Talking about the first 2 exiles, Babylonian and Media, right? And then the darkness is talking about Yavon, the Greek exile, and the face of the deep is talking about the Roman exile, and the Spirit of God hovering above the water is talking about Mashiach. So 4 exiles are talked about. Yet, interesting enough, in Parshas Lech Lecha, when Abraham has the famous bris bin Besarim at the age of 70, that's very important. Hold on to that number. 70, right? He only hears about Galus Mitzrayim. He only hears about being a stranger in a land not his for 400 years, which included also being in parts of Israel, amongst the Philistines at that time, that part of Israel, before we had the land in our own land. It wasn't our land yet officially. It was promised to us in the future. And then, of course, in Egypt for 210 years altogether, right? But doesn't mention Bavel, doesn't mention the other exiles at all. So you've got the Medrash talking about 4 exiles and not mentioning Mitzrayim. And then you have Bris bin Besarim talking about Mitzrayim, but not the other 4 exiles. So there's a reason for that. The truth is that all the other 4 exiles, there's only really one exile and one redemption. It's the exile of Mitzrayim, and it's the redemption from Mitzrayim. So then what about the other 4 exiles? Because we didn't finish off. We didn't. The redemption from Mitzrayim was not complete. It was not total. We talk about it being early because it was only after 210 years. And it was prophecy that we'd be there for 400 years. But it didn't say Mitzrayim for 400 years. So that's why Rashi tries to find a way to make it 400, going back to the birth of Yitzchak. And, but according to the Rizal, 210 was very specific. It's 10 times the name of God, Aleph, Hey, Yud, Hey, which is 21 times 10, 210 years, and a certain tikkun. A great discussion. You can read about that in Sharp Suki. But Mitzrayim was the main exile. It's the exile. And that's why it says that the final exile, the final redemption, is really just the completion of the first one. We will leave the final exile like we left Mitzrayim. So on one hand, it sounds like simply that the same way that happened back there, it's going to happen in the future too, but not that they're connected. But Kabbalah explains that even though it seems, according to some points of view, that 210 years was all the time we're supposed to spend in Mitzrayim, 190 years really cut off. And that's what the rest of history is to fix up, to finish off. So we owe 190. It's like someone who wants to pay back their mortgage early. You can walk in, you can cut it off by 10 years, but you don't get up for free. You have to pay a fine, first of all, and you have to pay up the rest of the amount of money, even more so than in the past. We're paying on a monthly basis. So this is really what history is all about. History has been the paying off of the last 190 years of Mitzrayim, and that's why, according to Ben Ish Chai, that Kates HaYamin, that itself is a story unto itself what those words mean, but Kates HaYamin, which literally means the end of days in Aramaic. Kates is Hebrew, Yamin is Aramaic for Yamin, right? But the actual gematria of the word Kate is 190. So the end of those, it should be Kate's Yamin, the end of days. Kate's Hayami means the end of those days. Which days? The days from Mitzrayim. So which days? 190 years. 190 years. It's just the internet. So technical difficulties. 1 second, please. I don't know. If you have I hope it's recording, but It might be fine for the recording, but I just have to keep going because I have no solution to the problem. Anyhow, but just to continue on with the idea. So therefore, that's why the final redemption is in fact the end of the one from Mitzrayim. Why? Egypt. Egypt is a geographical location south of Eretz Israel. It's this big, massive land, right there on the Mediterranean Sea, with the Nile River flowing through it, on the north and south. Right? What's so special about Egypt, especially today? Egypt is like a has-been. It's no longer such a influential power in the world. For a long time, ever since the Jewish people left Mitzrayim, it hasn't really made much history. And there's a time that shows up again in Tanakh, but not the way it once was. So it's because Mitzrayim, the word Mitzrayim, which we translate as Egypt, is a concept unto itself. The Mitzrayim means literally Meitzur Yam, the constriction of 15. And I know we've discussed this several times in the past, right? But that's the idea. That's what Excel is. It's Meitzur Yam. Now, what does Meitzur Yam mean? It literally means the constriction of 50. 50 what? Well, the Gemara says the world was made with Nun Shari Bina, which is why my website is called Shar Nun. I took it from that, right? Nun Shari Bina, 50 gates of understanding. Moshe got 49, and the 50th is yet to be revealed, although the Pri Tzaddik says it's special for people who become Bali Tshuva. Bali Tshuva has special access to 50th gate, but it's a very high level. It's a lot. It's the basis of Torah. And what it essentially is a mechanism, a spiritual mechanism that we use to be able to understand what God wants from us, to explain to us what we're here to achieve, and to help us to be able to accomplish that. You see, the world is all mixed up. It's all confused. People don't know what's up and down, true and false, right and left. It's like, but that's what the Nun Shar Bina are for, to help us to be able to put all that into perspective, to know what to do, to know how to meaningfully live out our lives. That's the goal. That's the idea. So Mitzrayim was a place that constricted it. But why would someone want to constrict it? If that's the truth, that's the emes. If someone says, here, take this door, that takes you right to the ultimate truth. You can know what life is all about. Why would you take it? Because there's something called the Yetzer Hara. It's not so simple. God doesn't want to just give you the truth on a silver platter. He wants you to work for it. He wants you to earn it. He wants you to spread it. He wants you to be a part of that process of revealing it. So therefore, he created the Yetzer Hara. In fact, the Gemara says that God himself says, I created the Yetzer Hara, and I created the Torah as its tavlin, which literally translates as a spice. Some like to call the word, translate tavlin as antidote. Antidote means you kill something. You want an antidote for a disease or for a sickness. It's to eradicate the illness. A tavlin doesn't eradicate, it enhances. You put spices into your food, not to kill the taste, but to enhance the taste. So therefore, there's a positive energy in the Yetzer Hara, and Torah helps you to channel it. And by doing this through free will choices, we build ourselves, we act as a partner with God in the perfection creation, and at the same time, earn our spot in the world to come forever. Eternal pleasure and connection with Hashem. So the Nun Shari Bina are to facilitate that, but you have to choose that. That's what life is about, to choose that. So Mitzrayim, they didn't have Torah. It was before the Torah was given. They just were descending from Ham, which came from Noah, and before, and you see, look at the world. Look at the world today. The world is run by the Yetzer Hara. It sits in the top of skyscrapers, calling all the shots. The foods that we eat, the clothing that we wear, the entertainment that we watch. It's all based upon the Yetzer Hara. As someone once explained, that people do things today for money, that if the Torah was around today, there's a Sanhedrin, but have to kill them for it, because it's such a violation of creation and the Ratzon of Hashem. And that's the world. Without Torah, the world just goes with instinct, Yetzer Hara, and does whatever feels good, within reason. Not within reason, but with a certain amount of constraint, because we understand if the world becomes completely hefker, if everyone's just doing what they want, then no one's going to survive. Some guy's going to shoot somebody else for his car, and they do this already, right? You can't go to bed at night and not worrying about who's going to rob you because there's no police. So we try to curb it somewhat for the sake of common safety and common security. But for the most part, without Torah, people don't know Yetzer Hara exists. I mean, the Christian world picked up from the Jewish world, and if the devil, the Satan, the devil made me do it. That's it, but it's not as sophisticated as the concept of the Yetzer Hara. And the world just goes with it. And that was Mitzrayim, and that was Egypt. And not only was that Egypt at the time, and then Egypt disappeared kind of because it got destroyed mostly by the Jewish people, only from by God during that time. But the concept of Mitzrayim is ongoing all through history. There's always some people. The world is in all of history basically is a history of Mitzrayim, because as long as mankind is pursuing the path of the Yetzer Hara, as long as anybody is constricting the wisdom of Torah, shutting it down, cutting it off, ignoring it, they are acting like a Mitzri. This is Mitzrayim, and geula, by definition, means to be free of that. And that's why the Torah is given to the Jewish people and not a Mitzrayim, because you have to leave Mitzrayim first. At least get outside of it, that Torah. And you see that in the world of Bali Tshuva, that anybody who still completely associates with the world of the Yetzer Hara and is stuck in it, you can't talk to them. They don't want to hear what you have to say. The same way talking about leaving now because it's unsafe to remain in the diaspora. People don't want to hear it. They'll have a billion excuses. They just won't listen. They won't hear what you're saying. They'll refute it without logic, just using hope instead. But once a person is able to get outside of it somewhat, then you can talk to them about it, and then maybe they can become a chozeh b'tshuva and return. So Torah, therefore, geula, by definition, is about leaving Mitzrayim. How do you do that? So we're just going to start that today and have to finish it next week, B'ezras Hashem. We'll go on with it next week. But it's very simple. You have to be an Adam. An Adam is what Hashem made first. When Hashem made Adam, he didn't just, he made all of mankind in one person. In fact, back to back. There was a female component on the other side and the male component on one side. Then Hashem split them apart, and then they got married, and the rest is history. So the concept of an Adam is really the concept of redemption. The full concept. Right now, it's a generic term. Adam just means a man or a person. You can use it for male, female, doesn't make a difference. Adam just means a human being today. But in the beginning, it meant a lot more. And conceptually, it means everything. In fact, the gematria of the word Adam is geula, redemption. Adam and geula are the same idea. If you're in geula, you're going to be in Adam. If you're in Adam, you're going to be in geula. Whatever Adam means, right? And Adam is made up of two components, two parts. The letter Aleph, which we're going to see is everything, and the word Dam, Daled Mem, which means blood. So Aleph always refers to the spiritual component, but so much more we'll see soon, B'ezras Hashem. And the Dam is the physical component, because the blood represents the body for the most part, and your life force, the nefesh, is in the blood. And when they come together in the proper balance, the person is B'Tselem Elokim, because Adam was made in the image of God, but you can lose it. You can become more like an animal by going more at the body, or you can become more like a tzaddik by going to the aleph. But there's a balance in between them, because if you become too spiritual, you can ignore your physical reality, and that can be damaging. There's a responsibility, as the Rambam points out. A person who's overly spiritual, they neglect their health, and if they die from it, it says chai b'nafsho. It's as if they committed suicide. It's not one of the worst ways to go, but certainly it's not what you're supposed to do. You have to find that balance for you personally. Everybody has to find their own balance. to know where they belong. And it's always in flux. It's always fluctuating. It's always changing because your spiritual reality can go up and down, back and forth. And you have to know every moment. That's what Cheshbon Nefesh is all about. Being an Adam. So somehow Adam is the opposite of Mitzrayim. When a person is being an Adam, they cannot be a Mitzri, so to speak. They cannot be Mitzrayim. So the whole point, and this is why the first plague in Egypt was the plague of blood. There are lots of ways to inflict the Nile River. Lots of ways to turn that god of Egypt upside down. Why blood? To tell the Jewish people that they have their aleph had been reduced to such an extent that it was missing from their existence. They literally were just like animals at that point. They were humans talking. They did, but they weren't living in the image of God, and that itself is enslaving. You don't have to be physically enslaved. It's just a reality of enslavement that results later on in the physical reality of enslavement. But in the beginning, it's all spiritual, it's all intellectual, it's all psychological, and the whole point of the 10 plagues over the course of the next year was to rebuild the aleph, because the word geula also, if you take the aleph out, it becomes the word gola. That's an exile, a person who's in exile. You want to transform a person in exile into a person in geula, you have to add the aleph. So it's like an equation. Adam on one side, geula on the other. Dam, gola. Same thing. If you put the aleph into the Adam, you get the aleph into the geula, and the mela, automatically you go free, and the world becomes the place it's supposed to become. And that's what it's all about. In fact, the Medrash says that the Torah began with the letter base because it's closed to the right-hand side and it's open to the left side, as if to say that what came before creation is off limits. What comes to the left, which is the rest of the Chumash, because we go from right to left in Torah, in Judaism, right, in Hebrew, that is what's open to you. That's what the Medrash says, and which is true. The Medrash says it's true, but it's not the deeper pshat. There's lots of times you find Midrashim will say things that for one level that's true, but it's not true on a deeper level, because anyhow, Kabbalah is the Aleph, and Kabbalah deals with everything before Ma'aseh Bereshis. That's where it goes up until. So the Aleph, Kabbalah, is definitely being spoken about, and we know a lot. Okay, it's not for everybody, for sure. And maybe the base is talking to most people. But for those who are Zoiche, they merit to learn Kabbalah, that's the Aleph. But I'll go one step further. The Torah begins with the base because the Aleph wasn't revealed yet. When Hashem made creation and made man, the Aleph wasn't revealed yet. In fact, that's what history is about. History is about the exile of mankind, literally, and the redemption of mankind. Man's job was to reveal the Aleph, and we'll see how incredibly deep this idea is, B'ezras Hashem, next week. The Torah began with the base as if to say, this is what you're working with. This is what you need to transform into the Aleph. And the Aleph, of course, refers to Hashem, because it's the word, it's the number one, right? And it's also the word aluf, which means a chief. So aleph always refers to the soul, but specifically to Hashem. So the aleph, when you're actually revealing the aleph in creation, you're revealing God. So that's why it says, for example, that the avos, the forefathers, were the merkava for the Shekhinah. They were a chariot for the divine presence. Why? Because everywhere they went, they were megala God. They revealed the aleph. That's what they were doing. They're bringing the aleph into the world, which was transforming the people around them from just dam to adam. It's a work in progress. Here we are, 5,784 years later, and we're still working on it. And it's tied in with the Eitz Das Tavara and our test today and the war going on. But that's the backdrop. That's what's going on. That's the exile. The exile is when the aleph is missing from people and the world. That's what you call Ol Masheker, the world of falsehood. The world that we're living in right now is like literally so confused, and its priorities are off, and what they call right is wrong and wrong is right, and left is like literally that's I mean, pun intended, it's a very dumb world today, meaning that it's not very smart, but also it's very bodily based. the Aleph is not there. That's what it says that the Jewish people are meant to be an Or L'Goyim, a light into the nations. It means that we're here to draw that Aleph down. That's what every individual has to do for themselves and those around them. There's basically two types of people in the world. Those who do it and act as a chariot for the reality of God through their life, through the things they think, say, do, whatever, they bring the reality of God more into the world. And when they do that, they bring Aleph into the world. So we're not going to get it all right now, how this ties to the war of Gog and Magog and all that. We'll see God willing next week. But I'll just leave you with a thought. If you look at the Aleph, it's basically made up of three components. Two yuds. There's a yud on top and there's a yud on the bottom, and they're connected with the vav in the middle. And the vav is key to all this. We'll see how the vav comes into play, especially it's good timing because Chanukah is coming up, and the vav is very important to the holiday of Chanukah and geula itself. But the lower yud and the upper yud really represent two worlds. In fact, the upper yud corresponds to the reality of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Shem Echad, and the lower yud at the bottom corresponds to our world, which corresponds to Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Med, connected by the vav in between. And we'll see why that's important in Chanukah, God willing, right? You know what that vav was? That vav, if you recall, well, not if you recall, but if you recall that the ladder that Yaakov saw in his dream, that spanned between earth and Shemayim, right? That's the ladder of exile. That's the ladder that Yaakov saw the angels going up and coming down. And he was told to climb himself and he refused to go. That's the vav between the two. And when a person is revealing God in the world, when a person is bringing redemption to the exile by transforming the Mitzrayim into geula, right? They're acting in the role of a vav, which is why vav also corresponds to Yosef Tzaddik, because he, in fact, corresponds to the vav. That's what his job was. He connected both worlds. You see, by Paro. Paro's down here, he's the lower one, right? God's up there, and he's in between, connecting, and his family too. Very important role to play in history. And we'll see how, God willing, that this is all what the war of Gog and Magog is all about and what's going on today. And if you tie it together properly, it should make much more sense. So, B'ezras Hashem, see you next week, and Shabbat Shalom should be a peaceful Shabbos for everybody, B'ezras Hashem, and all of Klal Yisrael should be safe and successful in all their endeavors, especially those protecting us from our enemies.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi. I know there's a lot of questions out there, so maybe we'll do some questions and answers next week. For sure, I want to know how we're going to get where you're telling us to go. Some of us are trying so hard already. I mean, we know we can do better and so on. You'll have answers maybe for next week. But when you're talking about this being a very dumb world, it reminded me of something you wrote a while back about the world was so woke that it was asleep or something like that. How did you say that? It was like, these woke people out there, they think they're so enlightened, and yet they're the most asleep, and they're the most asleep people. I think that's what you said, the most asleep.
That's often the way history works. A lot of times it's like the same. We have a concept called Sagi Nahor, right? Which literally means like enough light, a lot of light. We use it for a person who's blind. We call the Hilchos Avelus Hilchos Smachot, right? Because it's a negative thing, so we don't want to. We put a positive spin on it, although there's a deeper idea behind it also why it is called that. So in a sense, it's the same idea here, right? They call themselves woke, which is one of the weirdest names to call it. I can't possibly know where that came from, right? But it's like almost Hashem's way of saying that these are the people that are most asleep. But sleeping people can be dangerous too, very dangerous. So, but it all comes back to us in the end, and what I'm talking about tonight.
Okay, don't forget to visit Rabbi's new website, sharnonproductions.org. It's really fascinating. And this is sponsored by the Geula Hour, Miriam Project, that's mine, and bringthemhome.org is Josh Water, who is not here with us tonight, but he should be protected and well, and hopefully we're home with his kids for Shabbat and his wife. Thank you, Rabbi, for joining us. Have a good week. Have a good Shabbat, everyone.